In this video, I'm going to tell you about the ridiculous world tour that I've just done in order to win 1,000,000 air miles. There's not much of my face in it, so I've just recorded this little introduction so that you can see this. I'm obviously not in a studio, I'm in an Airbnb, backlit, terrible idea. There are some duvets and pillows, so hopefully the sound is okay. In June of this year, I found out about a Turkish Airlines challenge to go to all 6 inhabited continents of the world and win 1,000,000 miles. It's obviously a ridiculous idea. I would have to buy all these plane tickets, go to all 6 continents of the planet with my giraffe limbs squeezed into economy seats. And I'd have to find the time for all of this. So I didn't do it because I'm sensible, grown up and adult. But the problem is that often people tell me that I'm not very sensible, grown up or adult. And when people spread these kinds of lies, I start to believe that it's true. And so I booked it. And when I booked it, Turkish Airlines surprised everyone by saying, "Oh, no more new entries," and that's it. So the assumption is that they must have seen more people than expected start to book flights, or at least search for routes like Cairo to Sydney or Bucharest to Sao Paulo, these kinds of routes in aviation where taking 2 flights is actually cheaper than 1, because if you fly from Istanbul to Sao Paulo or to Sydney, you might pay more for your plane ticket than if you start in a destination in another country and connect through Istanbul. And these are the kinds of things that frequent flyers know about. And so if the airline notices lots of these savvy searches taking place, then they can assume that there are lots of frequent flyers who might be anticipating buying tickets. And so they said, if you haven't bought a ticket by now, this is a week after announcing the competition, then that's it, it's too late, you're not taking part. So however many of us bought at least 1 ticket within that week were largely committed to the challenge and the only ones allowed to do it. So I did it. I went to all 6 inhabited continents, the 7th being the South Pole, where Turkish Airlines fortunately don't fly to.
6 continents, hundreds of cities, and a one-of-a-kind adventure. Miles and Smiles invites you on an unforgettable journey. Fly to 6 continents with Turkish Airlines and earn 1,000,000 miles. Come on board. Discover the world with Miles and Smiles.
All of this to win 1,000,000 miles. But what is a mile? It's basically a thing made up by the airline, essentially their own currency that they control, and it's completely out of my hands, not regulated, no consumer protection like with normal currencies. It's just an agreement between me and the airline that there's 1,000,000 of these things that they'll let me use to buy stuff that they allow me to have. And the stuff that I'm the most interested in is booking flights. So for example, over the past few years, I've gone between Europe and Asia a lot, and using these miles is going to make that significantly cheaper than if I were to do the same kind of thing again with cash tickets. So this is the only element of this whole business that might seem sensible to a normal person. It's something I do all the time, and this is a way to make it cheaper. The numbers make sense. But I also know that there's an element of lack of control, a kind of gamble involved. It's not that dissimilar to going to a casino in some ways. And so in order for this to be worthwhile, and really in order for anything in life to seem like it's worthwhile, I had to enjoy it. You may or may not come to the same conclusion as me, but as far as I'm concerned, it was extremely enjoyable. The first stop was easy because by coincidence I'd already planned to be in Istanbul for 2 weeks, so I took a quick return flight to Muscat. Even though I insist that I wasn't on the run from the law, it certainly felt like it, racing through Muscat at 1 a.m. for really no easily digestible reason to spend 1 day there. I arrived at my generic hotel where I received a free upgrade for my 1-night stay there to a 3-room suite. In the morning, I saw the wonderful view of the mountains come tumbling down to some pretty little houses at the bottom, and I thought to myself, if I was staying in one of those, I'd be looking in the opposite direction at the Hilton Garden Inn. While in Muscat, I took various buses, and I think I'm probably in the minuscule minority of European tourists who travel around this place by public bus. It was certainly not easy to get the information that I needed, but it all worked. Was extremely cheap and entertaining. I saw the driver scream at a man for having a sleeveless top. After receiving his lecture, he was allowed to get on though, and we all saw his arms. And also, I had to move seats at one point to make way for a lady, lest she sit near a man. Muscat is quite a small place, but spread out over a large area with vast gaps between things. And as well as the absence of things in these rocky voids, I felt like the only tourist there. As you can see, everywhere I went was empty. It was 40 degrees in the shade. Had I not lived for 2 years in Morocco, this place would have felt incredibly exotic coming from Europe, but I ended up more surprised just how many similarities stretch from Northwest Africa far into Asia, especially what goes on in the wastelands. My return to Istanbul was a horribly timed 4-hour overnight flight, departing at some awful hour of the night that was actually morning by that point. But despite the timing, I was starting to realise Turkish Airlines had a much better economy class than most airlines I'd flown before, especially in terms of food. Destination 2 was another quick return trip. That's if you can call popping to Sao Paulo from Europe quick. If the Muscat itinerary had seemed challenging, I wasn't prepared for roaming the crack addict and military police riddled streets of Sao Paulo at 5 a.m. with a heavy backpack after a 13-hour overnight economy flight. And I also forgot that flipping hemispheres meant going into winter, and it's cold in the middle of the night in winter. I haven't had a winter in years. 5 a.m. is also really not a moment that any hotel considers game for check-in unless you're paying or earning by the hour. So basically I walked around initially in the dark for hours. Strip clubs were winding down from the evening before, few daytime businesses had yet opened. My backpack didn't get any lighter, although not being robbed was something I put down as a positive outcome. And eventually I managed to drop off my stuff at the hotel and go to a cafe, and from then on things took a relentlessly upwards trajectory. I spent the afternoon reheating my reptilian body in the sunshine and visiting various museums in what would later be described to me as the Beverly Hills of Sao Paulo. For the first of 3 times on this trip, I met up with a language student and he took me to a gallery opening and then to dinner. And the next day, I realised to my delight just how walkable the city is. I crossed many neighbourhoods to visit, I think, my favourite exhibition I've seen in years. It's an artist called Anna Amarim, and she's probably the most tedious person who ever lived. I thoroughly appreciated it. Her exhibition documented in meticulous precision the days, hours, minutes and seconds of her mundane life passing, with lines in books, video showing her drawing lines in books, stitched tapestries that resembled her lines in books. It was just what I needed. Mesmerising. By the end of an eventful day, though, I became too tired to function and managed to miss the last train of the evening to the airport. So once again, I found myself roaming the quasi-derelict streets around the main station in the cold of night, this time half asleep, until I was saved by Letitia in her VW Polo, who took me to the terminal for a not too extortionate fare, where in departures I promptly fell asleep for 3 hours on a bench, completely undisturbed, with an alarm so that I didn't miss the flight. It turned out to be, to my surprise, one of the best flights I've had, at least for economy. Finally, for the first half of the world tour, when I landed back in Istanbul, I immediately needed to take another flight, just a teeny weeny little hop to Athens. Even though I was barely on the thing for more than 5 minutes though, Turkish managed to provide a full meal service at 2 a.m. I'd already planned to spend a month in Athens because, as you can tell, I have no issue with 40-degree heat, and also because I have a friend who moved there when I left London and we hadn't seen each other since. After living in so many short-term rentals in Southeast Asia, where a kitchen consists of 3 IKEA bowls and a sink with undrinkable water, it was a relief to be in Europe for a while and have a functioning place fit for humans. I paid my respects to the pile of old rocks constituting the birthplace of philosophy and triangles, and I appreciated all the empty plinths in the Acropolis Museum, instructing me to go to the British Museum to see what wasn't there. A quick pause to say that if you don't find me completely obnoxious and you actually like this kind of nonsense, then I also write about it in a way that's befitting. Whiz over to longhaul.substack.com, link below, HALL, that's my name. Get it straight in your inbox, no faffing about. Destination 4 was Africa, where I chose Tunisia because it's relatively close to Istanbul. I really gave it no more thought other than wondering if Monoprix in Tunisia has the same carrot salad as in France. Turns out it doesn't. In fact, Monoprix in Tunis was an atrocious, pun-free imitation of the ones across the water. But otherwise, I was in for a wonderful surprise. As I landed, I started to assume that Tunis would have all the bits I don't like from Casablanca, a few of the highlights, and perhaps be more tedious to navigate, because Tunisia is only about a third as wealthy as Morocco. I expected things like my chance of crossing the road without death and merely having pavements at all to be pretty slim. Although the public transport ran on a vibe-based timetable, leaving me stranded in a neighbourhood called La Goulette for 2 hours, counting the Kongu vans that drove past, all my preconceptions soon evaporated, and another city was added to my list of places in North Africa that I prefer to Casablanca, most of them being in Morocco. The coastline of the ancient city of Carthage is just about as fantastic as the Amalfi Coast, I thought, but with the bonus of having a fraction of the tourists on the other side of the water. On my first night, there was a largely toothless man who approached me in the street. He talked of the good old days of Christopher Columbus, when you could just rock up anywhere in the world without paperwork, which made me think he was actually about 500 years old, and that would explain the lack of teeth. But he wanted me to find a way to get him into the UK so that he could find a British girl and marry her, and so I politely declined. To his credit, when I walked away, he left me alone, unlike the carpet seller in Fez one time, who spent the rest of the day popping up in my face all over the city after I'd had the audacity to not buy one of his rugs. Tunis airport, though, was atrocious. Despite the flight being delayed by an hour, virtually none of the suitcases made it on board. And when I realised the carousel in Istanbul wasn't about to spit out any luggage, and I noticed how many people from my flight were pouring out of the baggage services office, in I went. And I attempted to explain my onwards itinerary, but it was met with a look of absolute despair. So I gave up and told them to keep my case, and I'd just pick it up the next time I'm passing through. I had at least 2 next times lined up, and as such, I travelled blissfully light the next day to Australia. Fortunately, I had a change of underwear in my carry-on, otherwise I'd have become a biohazard and surely refused entry into Australian territory. Back to Australia, where I'd also recently lived for 2 years. It's amazing how quickly I'd forgotten about Country Road and Chemist Warehouse. Sydney turned out to be the only place on my trip with a terrible weather forecast while I was there, so I made the most of my 1 warm sunny day to walk all the way to and along the beaches. By the end of that day, I'd clocked up over 130,000 steps since arriving in Tunis, and I promptly developed something called shin splints, which I'd never heard of before, but they meant that I spent the rest of this tour limping. I met up with a friend in Sydney, as well as another language student, and gradually the rain became torrential and relentless. I was still not suffering any jet lag though, maybe because my body was too confused to know exactly what to lag. If you've never been to Australia, I thoroughly encourage it. It's an extreme and ridiculous place, but I'd say it's far more interesting to contrast the bougie suburbs of Sydney with somewhere like the Northern Territory. I wasn't about to do any of that though. I had to go home at last, and by home, I'm talking about a place I'd never been to in my life, and a journey I would take very exceedingly much the long way round. Most flights from Australia to North America, and by most I mean all, go over the Pacific. Despite 2 world tours, I've never flown over the Pacific, making me come across like a stubborn flat earther planning my trips in 2D. But my excuse this time is that the challenge required all destinations to be reached from Istanbul. And so I spent around 30 hours doing Sydney, Kuala Lumpur, Istanbul, Montreal. Or, as a Canadian citizen, maybe I should say Montreal. Arriving here was the first time I had to deal with slightly tedious immigration. In Istanbul, there was never a single question about why I seemed to be there every 5 minutes, but the Canadian border staff found it suspicious that I would go all that way for 48 hours. Well, the guy wished he'd never asked, because I took the opportunity to launch into a soliloquy about my adventure, and he shut me up by handing me my passport before I'd even got to any of the highlights. Being in the motherland, I decided to use only the mother tongue when speaking to everyone. It turned out that about half the people I spoke to were actually Americans. I continued in French nevertheless, and had a great time, enjoying the effort they went to cobble together some French for me, despite surely detecting that I'd spoken with a British accent. Votre café allongé, monsieur. Merci beaucoup. By this point, I finally realised my itinerary was actually insane. I was limping around with my so-called shin splints, and by the afternoon I had to go back to the hotel and lie down. On my last day, I tried to get buses everywhere to save my aching shin, but they were mostly so infrequent that it was quicker for me to limp. This is North America after all. Mentally though, I'd never felt better. You might have seen me arrive at the airport in a state of total destitution, but I was drunk on absurdity. It's now the end of October, and that's the challenge deadline, so it means that for anyone taking part who didn't make it to all 6 continents, that's it. In a couple of weeks I'll find out if I actually get my 1,000,000 miles, but I have no idea how many other maniacs have completed this. Even Turkish Airlines can only reasonably accurately guess. But I'm in a group chat with about 60 or 70 other people doing this, so that's at least 60 lunatics. A long time ago, I at least started to read The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton. And the main thing that I remember from it is the idea that when you go away, basically when you escape on your travels, you take yourself with you. And therefore, if you don't like yourself, you're never going to have a good time traveling with all that emotional baggage that you can't help but carry with you. Fortunately, I don't hate myself, and if you've made it all this way, then clearly you should subscribe to these articles that I write every couple of weeks. I won't resent you if you go for the free option. You never need to pay a penny. There's no advertising, sponsorship, or anything like that. And even if you don't, thank you for joining me vicariously to all 6 inhabited continents on the planet.